Hi, folks. We're getting started now. And good evening, and welcome to this session on rediscovering your happy self. For those of us who are in the world of business, one word that we often hear and perhaps even use ourselves is a word called disruption. Okay. And this was a word which is, people probably heard and used it many times a day. But it was only when COVID-19 happened that we really understand the true implication of what disruption meant. Okay, the world over, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. Unemployment rates world over are touching dizzying levels. Businesses are closing down. Uh, Even if most of the people who are there in this group today have not faced any of it directly, we are still concerned about and worried about the safety and well-being of our own loved ones. There is a certain sense of anxiety of the future. When will this all get over? When will I be able to resume my normal life? you know. So at Cafe Mutual, we thought, why not initiate a dialogue at this moment of time on happiness? Because, the other thing, Raj, is that the lockdown has all converted us all into philosophers. It gave us so much of time. We've been all consciously or unconsciously thinking about what life means, relationships, and happiness. So, in that context, I thought it would be good to have you talk to us. So, let me start with a brief formal introduction of Raj Raghunathan, Professor Raj Raghunathan. He is the Zale Centennial Professor at the School of Business, Macomb Business School at University of Texas, Austin. Uh, in 2015, 2016, and 2017, which is for 3 consecutive years, Raj ran the most popular online course globally. In fact, his course on happiness is among the 50 most popular online courses ever. Okay. Raj has been published in top journals globally. His comments and interviews have appeared in New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, Times of India. So Raj has very impressive credentials, but for me, the most important qualification, in a manner of speaking, which Raj has, which qualifies him to be with us today, is the fact that Raj practices uh, what he preaches. Okay. In fact, I'm not sure, and maybe Raj will. I'll ask you that question later, whether the kind of views that you formed are because of the research that you did, or was it because of the fact they were based on your own personal observations? I clearly, having known you for 3 decades, I know that some of it is based on perhaps your actual thinking, your own experiences, things that you've learned and put to good use for yourself. So, Raj, very excited to have you with us. And folks, you're welcome to throw in questions at us. We will try and take as many questions as possible. Uh, the way we will do it is Raj will speak for about 15, 20 minutes, and then it'll be open house. So over to you, Raj.
Thank you very much, Prem. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've seen the evolution of Cafe Mutual from a idea to a very successful company, and I really welcome everybody here who's attending the session. I know that the title of the session is something like reconnecting with your happiness. Can you remind me, Prem, what exactly is the title?
Rediscovering your happy self.
Rediscovering a happy self. Right. And that has an element of this idea that we were happy once and we lost it, and now we want to rediscover it, right? It's not discovering a happy self, it's rediscovering a happy self. So I want to start out with a observation that scientists have made through surveys that they've conducted worldwide on happiness across the ages. When are we the happiest? Are we happiest as children? Are we happiest as teenagers? Are we happiest as middle-aged people? Are we happiest as older people? And what they've discovered, and this is universal, okay, so it's not restricted to one particular country, it's universal, is that we are in fact happiest as children. Okay, and this particular survey that I'm thinking of looked at happiness. So somebody says, can you make it louder? Do you want me to be louder? You can maybe increase the volume on your side. I don't know if I can do anything more on my side to increase the volume. So let me know if you increase the volume on your side, it still doesn't work. And yeah, it is fine, says somebody. Okay, so so imagine a graph in your head, which has on the x-axis the age of the participants, on the y-axis is how happy they are. It turns out that we are among our best years are as children, as 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds. And then it kind of comes down. Teenage years are not only the years in which we look our most awkward, we are also least happy during those years. And then it goes up, okay, as we start to kind of earn money and finish our college degrees and so on and so forth, and gain some autonomy over our life. And then we hit this midlife crisis. So that is a thing, okay? That is not just a figment of people's imagination. It turns out that in the research, there actually is a dip around 45. Somebody says they can't hear anything. Okay, Prem, is it okay on your end?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. If you can't hear anything,
problem, but I don't think we can do anything to fix it.
Okay. Right. So okay. So there's a dip, and then remarkably, maybe many of you find this to be surprising, but happiness actually goes up after the age of 60. Okay, and then eventually it goes down again when people are about 80, 90. Of course, lots of people have passed away by then, but among the people who still continue to live, it goes down. And we can talk about why that happens at the old age. It's partly to do with needing help from other people, losing a sense of control over your own body. But of course, the big thing is losing your life partner and friends. So the big point I want to make is that we are in fact happy as children. So there is something to this title of rediscovering your happy self. Okay, so why is it that children are happy, and why is it that we lose our happiness? To a large extent, it has to do with losing our innocence, so to speak. As children, we don't really think that much about the future. We don't plan for the future, and that's maybe the bad thing. But the good thing is we don't worry about the future as much. We are more innocent. We don't jump to negative conclusions about people. We are not yet as cynical about other people's motives, about negative things happening. We may not even be aware that there is such a thing called death, right? Which is a big, it's called mortality salience, and there's a terror associated with the knowledge that we are one day going to pass, and it promotes nihilism, this idea that, what is it all worth anyway, I'm going to die. Lots of reasons for it. What I want to focus on are 3 reasons that we lose our innocence, so to speak. 3 reasons why we end up being less happy when we end up in adulthood. And once we become aware of those reasons, then maybe we can do certain things to take some corrective action. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these 3 things. And in fact, if you're interested in exploring more into the topic, I talk about 7 different things in my book. It's called If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? Okay, but let me talk about 3 things in the interest of time. And I picked these 3 things because I think that it's going to be particularly relevant for people working in the finance industry. So very first thing that we pick up as we become older is this desire to be superior to other people. Desire to be superior to other people, which is reflected in our desire to be more famous than other people, more powerful than other people, more good looking than other people, more accomplished, and of course, also to be richer than other people. Okay, so if you look at the biography that was written about Rajat Gupta, he was probably worth $100 million, but he had friends who were worth, many times that, hundreds of millions of dollars, and he wanted to belong to that club. And as somebody who doesn't have $100 million, it feels like, why? Why? What difference does it make between 100 and say $300 million? But if we were ourselves to be in that position of having $100 million, then we'd probably want to be in the $300 million club, right? So that desire to be better than other people, superior to other people, can even get the best of us, okay? And what happens is that when you're a child, you don't really engage as much in social comparisons. But as you get older, and it's partly got to do with our educational system, partly got to do with our upbringing. I'm sure that especially as Indians, most of you guys are probably very familiar with this kind of a template. When you're growing up, you're told, why can't you be first in class? Why can't you be like Satish, who has already started reading Harry Potter books and you're still stuck on reading Amar Chitra Katha or whatever, right? So this comparison to other people is ingrained in us. And the tricky thing is that it does motivate us and lights a fire under our backside to pull an all-nighter, study for that exam, do better than other people. The insecurity, the fear, the guilt, the shame, all these negative emotions can prompt us to work harder. But if we rely on that in order to achieve success over the long term, you end up actually affecting your happiness negatively. And there's a much better way to achieve success, which has got to do with love, which has got to do with pursuing your intrinsic motivations and your passions. Okay, and it's a big topic, and I can get into it. So even if you believe that the people can motivate you is very important for your success, you have to remember that it's going to come at a cost. It's going to come at a severe cost to your happiness. So the big idea here is not to compare yourself to other people as much as possible. It's going to be very tough because as human beings, we're highly social, and there is some information that we derive from comparing ourselves to other people about what is achievable, what is possible. We get inspired by other people, but it's a double-edged sword. Okay, it does have this negative side to it, which is that it ends up affecting your happiness negatively. And in particular, if you compare yourself to other people on money, okay, this trait on money and possessions, it's called materialism. If you associate your self-esteem to how much you own and what you own, if you associate other people's self-esteem and you value them more if they own a certain set of brands, have a certain amount of money, have a big bank balance, etc., that materialistic trait has been showed again and again in many different studies in many different contexts to be one of the biggest happiness killers. So the idea is to become less materialistic. That's not to say that you don't want goods, you don't want products, but you have to sever the link between owning those products and your self-esteem. That is the big link, okay? So you can have the latest gadgets, you can have all of those things, you can use them, derive pleasure and utility from them, but if you start associating owning those with your self-esteem, that's what gets you into trouble. And with money, what is also found, this is the last thing that I'll talk about in terms of chasing money and superiority, is that lots of studies are now showing that the merely coming into money is going to lower the priority you give to relationships. Merely coming into money is going to lower the priority you give to relationships. So they've done a lot of studies. There's a very good TED talk on this topic by a guy called Paul Piff, P-I-F-F. I'd highly encourage you to watch it. But in the studies, what they do is they temporarily, within the context of the, let me just, okay, I don't know why I'm getting some messages on my phone, even though I switched it off. So in the context of the study, they assign people to either a wealthy condition or a not so wealthy condition. And so, for example, they make them play a game like Monopoly or trade, and this artificial money. And even then, they get this effect where the people who are made to feel richer end up deprioritizing relationships within that context. So, for example, they made to run. They have the study where they're even exposed to money, so not even made to feel rich, just seeing on the screensaver $100 bills floating or other more neutral scenes. And then in the second part of the study, they are supposed to go to another room and sit next to a person who's already there, right? That person has been put by the experimenter there, but the subjects are not aware of this. They think that he or she is a genuine participant in the experiment, and they're asked to pull a chair and sit next to them, and they observe the distance between themselves and the other person. How close are they willing to get to the other person? How distant do they want to be? And if you're made to feel richer, if you've seen money, the more the distance between yourself and other people, okay? So what it means is that if you become richer, you're probably going to sacrifice your relationships. You're probably not going to keep up with your friends. You're going to maybe feel a little bit superior to them, and maybe even going to deprioritize your own family and your spouse and your children, right? So you got to be very, very careful about it. So that's one thing. So, okay, don't pursue superiority. And the second thing, which is related, which I already touched upon a little bit, has to do with your relationships, right? So don't deprioritize your relationships. I think it's a very, very important determinant of your happiness. In fact, if you look at most research and look on happiness, and you kind of like ask yourself this question, what is the single most important determinant of your happiness? Much of the research will point to your relationships, the quality of your relationships. And this becomes particularly important as you become older. And here I want to give you this very interesting set of studies on love, right? A relationship, when you talk about relationships, obviously you've got to talk about love and romantic relationships. So when you look at the research on romantic relationships, it turns out there are two kinds of love. Okay, one is what's called passionate love. And passionate love has to do with, obviously sexual attraction, and there's this energy behind that kind of a love, right? And most of us have felt it when you kind of, love at first sight happens, and you imagine this person to be your life partner, and you think that everything is going to be a bed of roses from now on. It's magical. There's absolutely nothing that you can think of that's a flaw in this person. Okay, you might want somebody who's a great cook, or is very organized, or has a great attitude, and they're the exact opposite of it. They say, oh, I wanted a great cook, and this person is not such a great cook. You know what? That's so cute, because now I can cook for them, right? So you turn even negatives into positives because you're in love, right? So that's called the passionate love phase. Okay, everything is magical, and you can't imagine any life event being negative if this person were with me, right? There's even a song in this lyric in the song "O Mere Dil Ke Chain." He says that तुम जो पकड़ लो हाथ मेरा तो
मंजिल पकड़ सकता हूँ मैं.
दुनिया बदल सकता हूँ मैं.
दुनिया बदल सकता हूँ मैं.
Yeah, so everything seems possible in that kind of a passionate love, right? But it turns out there's another kind of love. It's called companionate love. And so again, if you, in your mind's eye, you imagine a graph with time on the x-axis, right? And the intensity or the significance or meaning of the love on the y-axis. So passionate love is like a volcano, right? It doesn't last too long, it turns out, right? As we have all discovered, unfortunately. It maybe lasts for, 2 months up to 2 years, but sooner or later, it'll come down for everyone, okay? So it's like a big volcano, passionate love. And then if you kind of zoom back a little bit and look at a 30, 40-year window, it's another kind of love that actually picks up. It's called companionate love. And companionate love has to do with having joint memories together, say going on vacations, raising a child together, saving for a house, saving for retirement, having common goals, etc. So companionate love is not like a volcano. It's like a steady flame. It's like a diya, right? But if you look at a long enough window, then the passionate love is actually the one that starts to look insignificant, right? It had a huge burst, but it burnt out. And now the companionate love is like a huge Tibetan plateau, if you will, okay? So it's much, much more important and significant. And so very important to recognize that. And the thing that nurtures companionate love are these things that I talked about, like common memories, achieving common goals together. And that takes daily effort or very sustained effort, okay? Regular investments into it. And you guys are all in the finance industry, so you understand this. It's like compounding interest, if you will, in terms of companionate love. Every day, if you invest a little bit in it, right, it starts to give you dividends that are big in the long term. And it's very, very important, particularly in the second half of your life, to have those relationships. A few very close relationships are much better than hundreds of superficial relationships like you might have on Facebook. Those don't count for much when it comes to your happiness. What counts is having at least 1 or 2 really good friends or life partners. So don't deprioritize your relationships. And this is important because money especially, but even other yardsticks of extrinsic success, fame, power, etc., can actually dilute your prioritization of relationships. So that's one thing that I wanted to talk about. The second big thing is control. When you become successful, when you become powerful, you tend to have this desire for even more control. It's kind of like actually paradoxical. When things are not going well in your life, you're actually more willing to surrender to life's vicissitudes. Okay, the more you're successful, the more control you've been given, right? I mean, you can think of success as basically being as defined as being given more resources, being given more control, right? So when you're successful, you control more money, you control more people, you control more outcomes within your firm, you're the strategic vision giver, and so on. And when you taste that control, that being given that control, then you seek even more of it. And it turns out having that level of desire for control is not a good thing for your life. Okay, we all know that life can be completely uncertain, right? One moment you think this is going to happen. Who would have predicted, for example, the pandemic, right? Nobody predicted it, and who knows what's going to happen next. So when you tether your happiness to life working out exactly like you want it, and other people behaving like you want them to behave, you're actually setting yourself up more for misery than for happiness. Okay, this is a very important thing to remember, that life cannot be controlled. Life, I like to say this, life is like Donald Trump's hair. Completely out of control. Okay, so the more you try to control life, you're actually setting yourself up for misery rather than for happiness. And so the idea is to give up that control, or only seek a certain level of control. So not wanting any control, not wanting to achieve any goals, not wanting other people to lead better lives, etc., is not a good thing either, right? So there's an inverse relationship. So you do need some level of aspirations. You need to have aspirations and goals, etc. But there is a level beyond which it becomes desperate, it becomes feverish. And so how do you know where you are? Are you at the right level of control? You can ask other people. If they think that you're a control freak, then you probably have gone too far. The important thing to remember here is that it's not as if I'm saying that seeking control is a bad thing. Okay, seeking control over external things, over other people and over outcomes, and your happiness being linked to that being in control is the bad thing. What is good is to seek what I call internal control, control over your own mind, control over your own emotions, control over your own thoughts and behaviors. And in this context, I think the word control is probably not the appropriate word. It has a negative connotation of being restrictive, right? Controlling, caging something in. I think a better word to use is the ability to regulate. The ability to regulate your mind, regulate your feelings, regulate your behaviors. And that in turn depends on how kind of, intrapsychically smart you are, how much emotional intelligence you have, and you can develop it over time through mindfulness practices, through meditation, through techniques that cognitive behavioral therapy has given us. If you're not familiar with that term, you can Google it. You'll see lots of hits that you get, okay, on cognitive behavioral therapy. Essentially, the idea is, in a nutshell, the idea is to change the pattern of thoughts that you have so that the set of emotions that you experience are different, right? And this is very important to understand, because as human beings, it turns out that 90%, okay, as much as 90% of our emotions are due to what goes on between our two ears, okay? When you look at children, when you look at animals, 90% of their emotions, maybe even 100%, are due to external circumstances, okay? If they don't have food, if they have pain, if they're not taken care of, if the weather's too cold, etc., that's what drives their emotions, right? But as adults, we can, even take our own lives because the tax season is coming, right? So it really is what is going on between your two ears that's more important. And so if you change that content of those thoughts, you're going to change your emotions, okay? So that's a big idea behind it. So seek internal control, not external control. Okay, and the final thing that I want to talk a little bit about is also something that smart and successful people do. And when we become adults, are more culpable of it. Which is to be mind addicted. Okay, mind addiction is a manifestation of a deeper underlying belief. And the belief is that I can arrive at a better solution to any problem if I just think a little more about it. Okay, so I can arrive at a better solution to any problem if I just think a little more about it. It turns out that that's not true. Okay, sometimes you don't really come at a better solution if you think more about it. In fact, you're probably going to be in a worse off place if you think more and more about it, partly because thinking more and more, especially about problems, there's a word that psychologists use to refer to that phenomenon. It's called rumination. Ruminating about a negative thing is one of the kind of hallmarks of a depressive personality. So it's not going to be good for your mood. You're not going to make yourself happy by ruminating about things. And because of that, what is also going to happen is that your decisions are going to suffer. Okay, we make our best decisions when we're feeling good, when we're feeling centered, when we're feeling calm, not when we're feeling depressed and anxious and sleep deprived. Okay, but also it turns out another reason why overthinking about things, I call it mind addiction, right? This belief that I can arrive at a better solution, just think more about it. It's not good, is because sometimes going with your gut is the right thing to do. Okay, so let me just give you an example here. I actually had a friend like this, okay, who would, even in the dating context, okay, even in the dating context, and certainly in context like, buying a TV and those kind of contexts, but in a dating context, would make an Excel spreadsheet, all right, with all the alternatives in the dating context, is all the women he was dating, all the alternatives on the x-axis on the rows, and all the attributes in the columns. And he would give a score after he went to a date on all these attributes for every single person, and then assign some weights to those attributes. Good looking was very important and so on. And then he would kind of calculate the overall score that everybody got. Okay. And then he did this and he came up with a score. And I remember this, and he said, hey, Meena comes out on tops, but really, I like Anita better. And I'm not using the actual names here, but, and then what he did was change the weights so that, Anita would come out on top. So we're kind of fooling ourselves into believing that thinking is going to lead us to better solutions, when our heart often is the right thing to depend on for these decisions. Okay. So again, what can you do in order to be less mind addicted? One of the exercises that helps a lot is mindfulness again, and meditation, and I can talk more about it. Okay, it also helps with internal control, also helps with mind addiction, but also recognizing that there is a place for your heart to make decisions, and there are places for where you have to depend on your mind. If you go to the mutual fund context and you say, oh, I love the logo of this company, so I'm going to invest money in it, I'm going to follow my heart, that's not a good thing, right? In the context of functional decisions, as they're called, we call them in the research functional decisions, where what you're looking for ultimately are instrumental functional benefits. It's better to depend on your mind, better to depend on your thoughts. But when it comes to hedonic benefits, emotional benefits, like you seek in a life partner, like you seek in a home buying decision as opposed to a house buying decision. If the house is purely as an investment, go with your mind, location, 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 right? And those kinds of things. But if you want to go buy a home, then go with your heart. Okay. So depending on a variety of circumstances, you can kind of like use one or two of these inputs, either the inputs of your heart or of the mind. Okay. So let me just summarize a little bit. I think I'm right at the time when I'm supposed to end in about 20 minutes. So basically, as we go from children to adults, we often incorporate or adopt a bunch of traits that we think are good for us because they help us succeed. They help us be better looking in the eyes of other people. But in the process, we kind of lose our soul, if you will. Okay, we lose what's ultimately most important to us, which is the sense of happiness, the sense of fulfillment, the sense of meaning. There's nobody in this world, I think, who would disagree with that ultimately that's what matters more. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't adopt these traits. I'm just saying that be careful, because if you adopt these traits, then there's a chance that you're sacrificing what's ultimately more important to you. So the way to have both the success and the happiness is to actually acquire a bunch of habits that I talk about as habits in my book. So pursue your passion. That is going to probably lead you to more success, but also not at the cost of happiness. Be in control of your own mind rather than seeking control over other people and over outcomes. And don't be mind addicted. You control your mind. You get to choose when you're going to depend on your mind or when you're going to depend on your instincts or on your heart. Okay, so you have to be the driver of that decision rather than being mind addicted. Okay, so that's the summary of what I've said. I hope you found it useful, and I'll stop here now and turn it over to Prem.
Hey, Raj, that was so good. And so finally, there is a lot of merit actually in movies. Movies will always tell you that relationships are more important than money, right? So the gold digger, the person who's married someone else for money, is always seen to be a good thing. So there's a lot of merit in that. So movies do teach us good things, contrary to.
And the interesting thing here, Prem, is that if I'm a business school professor, right? I'm in marketing, and if you look at advertising, Okay, you and I used to be in the advertising business, so you know this really well. We are very, very good as advertisers in recognizing this, right? So people recognize ultimately that there are a certain set of things that are actually the true and sustainable determinants of happiness. They are relationships, they are autonomy and freedom, okay? Things like that, okay? And what advertisers do, very, very clever, what they do is that they start almost like classically conditioning people to associate their products with these things that people truly deeply desire. So if you drink Budweiser, you're going to have friendships, okay? If you buy a Rolex, you're going to have freedom. So what they do is over time, just through sheer kind of like juxtaposition of these products with these things that we truly desire, if you see the advertisement for Budweiser 1,000th time and you see that they're having fun and drinking Budweiser gives them more friendships, they're going to think that, oh, maybe that's a secret to my getting friendships. Okay, it's a very, very subversive trick. So even though I'm in marketing, I do have to acknowledge that that's a negative side of advertising. It drives up consumerism and makes people feel that these products can deliver the thing that they actually cannot. They cannot, Budweiser is a material thing. It cannot provide friendships. It cannot provide happiness. And yet we start to assume at some level subconsciously that it can. So not just movies, but even advertising is very, very good at this.
Okay. And now, Raj, we'll get into questions.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So I want, can you share a few practices that we can make it a part of our daily life? Maybe, on how to kind of control your impulses when you find yourself comparing to, say, other people. That's a major, the envy or whatever, jealousy or whatever. And then you talked about, not being mind addicted so much. Maybe 1 or 2 points of each, Raj.
Sure. I have maybe about 20 practices, very small things that I do almost every single day. And more recently, I've started kind of, I have an Excel spreadsheet. And on the x-axis, I have all the things, or y-axis, I should say, on the rows, I have all the things that I want to do every day. There's little things like flossing my teeth every day to more big things like a mindfulness practice. And then on the columns, I have the days of the month. And then I just put an X or a tick mark on those cells in which I've accomplished those things, okay? And then I have a running total at the bottom. What are the 20, how many did I do? So let me just share 3 things that I think are, particularly, I call them low-hanging fruit. They're relatively easy to do and yet have big impact on you. So one of those things is as soon as you wake up in the morning, right? As soon as you wake up in the morning, before you get out of bed, just think to yourself, what are some things that are going to happen today, right? And what am I really excited about? What am I looking forward to for today? Okay, so don't reach out for your phone the first thing in the morning. In fact, your phone should be outside your bedroom, I feel. Don't, because that's what many of us do. We just reach out almost instinctively to our phone and look at our emails and, oh shit, this is happening, that is happening. It sets us, into a bad mood. So think about 1 or 2 things. It doesn't have to be big. It can be even just the, very next thing you're going to do, maybe, like have breakfast. But, you just tell yourself, okay, these are things that I'm looking forward to. That sets the tone for the day. Okay. Likewise, I bookend my days with that, and at the end, I write in my journal every single day religiously. I've been doing it for now, 6-7 years. I just write about 3 good things that happened that day. And when you do it every day, it can't be big good things, right? I got a bonus today or whatever. It's going to be some, most days it's going to be small good things. I ran into my grandparents today and it was so nice to see them, right? Things like that. But just make a note of those things. And I can talk a little more about why that's important later on. Okay. So those are 2 things I would say. And, and this third thing is not necessarily low hanging fruit, but I do think that it has a big impact. So I'll talk about it, is to get some level of exercise every single day, right? So maybe, you got to kind of like stretch yourself a little bit. So it depends on your current levels of physical fitness. For some of us, it might be just taking a 20-minute walk. That's already going to be a lot. Okay. For others, it can be like, actually running maybe 5 miles. Okay. Or going to the gym and working out, but incorporate some level of physical activity. I think especially for Indians, and I don't necessarily blame it on our culture or whatever. I think that it's also because of lack of infrastructure, lack of availability. We don't have as many parks, right? Unfortunately, if you've traveled to the West, you know that even a big city will have lots of spaces allocated to parks and greenery. But in India, unfortunately, that's not true. So it's got to do with that partly. But maybe join a gym. Maybe hire a trainer if that is what is going to get you motivated. But do that. It's going to have good effects in so many different areas. We can talk a long time about it. So associated with that exercise, it's part of what I call a healthy lifestyle. Eat well, sleep better, move more. Moving more is what I talked about, but eating is very, very important. Indians in particular, I think there's a good book called the South Asian Diet Solution. I think it's called South Asian Diet Solution, which talks about our propensities to have this kind of like heart-related diseases. Okay, so we genetically, Indians are more predisposed to developing thicker arteries, which gives us blood pressure and diabetes and inflammation, and eventually leads to heart attacks. So the idea is to kind of like control it through not just exercise, that's important, but also through diet, and not eat things, as general rule of thumb, not eat things that look white, right? A lot of it. So white rice, sugar, salt, milk. Okay. And you might say that milk is actually a good thing, but yogurt is good, but I don't know if milk is good. So eating more and then sleeping better. Not eating more, eating better. So sleeping well is very, very important. So don't sacrifice your sleep, get at least 7 hours. And now I think with the pandemic, one good thing that's happened is that we have a little more time on our hands. So those are some of the things that I would say, Prem, okay, as being things that will definitely boost your happiness if you do them.
Okay, one question. How do you make tough decisions, which have a lot of implications? So how do you make difficult choices?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question. And by the way, on the previous question, you did ask me about some things that we can do to control our envy and things like that. So big point, I just want to kind of circle back on that just for a minute. The big point that I would make is that try and control your behaviors. Okay, it's much easier to control your behaviors than it is to control your thoughts. Thoughts are abstract. Thoughts occur because of your life's habits, and unless you change your life's habits, the thoughts are not going to be easy to change. So it's much easier to control your behavior. So if you feel that you can spend a lot of time being envious, spend a lot of time in negativity, control the behavior that is leading to those thoughts, right? So the behavior could be that you're spending a lot of time on social media. When you get to know about other people's achievements, everybody we are just as guilty as other people are, right? Everybody posts only their best pictures, the best accomplishments, and so on and so forth. And the more you get exposed to it, even though you consciously know that's what they're doing, your subconscious mind feels that your life is bad and everyone's life is great. So control the amount of time you spend on social media, control the amount of news you read, right? Things like that. So if you control your behaviors, you have a greater chance of controlling your thoughts. So with regard to this, how do you have these?
How do you take hard decisions in grave situations? That's a question asked by Rupesh.
Right. So, there's no easy answer to that, right? I mean, if there was an easy answer, then we'd have all adopted it and it would not be a question anymore. The reason it's a tough thing to answer is that these hard decisions, by definition, have a lot hanging on them, right? There's a lot of outcomes that are going to depend on the decisions that you take. So that makes it very difficult to find an easy solution to that. What I would say is that the more you are a kind of person who's not seeking personal glory, personal gains, personal benefits out of decisions, the easier it's going to be to make those hard decisions, because it's not personal for you anymore, right? So imagine that there's a hiring decision and you actually think that somebody's worse off and you privately know it, but you really want that person to be there for whatever reason, okay? And you now have to go into the meeting to convince everybody else who also recognizes this person is not as good as another person, but they also know that you have a private agenda, so they have their defenses up. That becomes hard for you, but that's hard because it's personal. It's like your ego is involved, right? You want a particular outcome and you're biased. Okay, but imagine a scenario where, you really didn't care what happened ultimately, so long as it was good for the company, and you're going to argue for your case based off of only that objective, what's best for the company. then it automatically lifts the weight off your shoulders. Okay. But having said that, there are many occasions in which you can genuinely think path A is the best. Somebody can genuinely think path B is the best. And you think that if you go down path B, it's going to be doomsday scenario. And you genuinely feel worried for everybody, you included, and everybody else. And that's hard, not because you're biased, but because you generally, you have a genuine disagreement with other people, right? So in these kinds of scenarios, I feel that, really, I mean, the only answer at some level is to adopt a somewhat spiritual attitude towards it. Okay. So what I mean by that is this idea that, look, if you think about life as a whole, right? How long has the Earth existed? Maybe 4.5 billion years. If you look at the universe, maybe it's existed forever, but the most prevalent scientific theory is the Big Bang theory, according to which it's existed for about 14 billion years. And we occupy on Earth, I don't know, 80, 90, 100 years, right? And we make a big deal out of our problems. Okay, we are the center of our universe, and we think that, hey, if this happens, it's like doomsday. If this happens, it's great. We go through this huge roller coaster ride. And, remember at the beginning, I talked a little bit about how as older people, we get to be happier. Okay. And one of the big reasons why we get to be happier as older people is because we realize we are not the center of the universe. Okay. That things pass. Okay. And, it's not a big deal. Okay. You've gone through so many life's ups and downs that another up or a down comes, you're relatively more equanimous when you face it. Okay. So, and the way to accelerate yourself to that phase is to kind of, tell yourself the story that, life has existed for a very long time. Why am I kind of freaking out about this? Okay. Why am I making a big deal out of this? And in this context, I have a set of studies that are, I think, relevant. I'll just very quickly give you the synopsis of those studies. And what we've done in these studies is to ask people to recollect an event that happened in their past that's negative, and then ask them three questions. How did you feel about it when it happened? How intensely do you feel about it now? And how meaningful that event was. And we ask them to recall positive and negative events. Now, what we find, which is very interesting, is that people actually feel much less intensely about past negative events than about past positive events. So if you think back on a positive event like your child's birth or promotion or marriage or whatever, you're maybe you felt 7 out of 7 when it happened. Now you feel maybe 6.5. There's a drop in intensity, but not a whole lot. But for negative events, that you had a breakup with somebody, or you lost a job, or sufficient time. If sufficient time has passed, more than 2 years have passed since that event happened, negative event, you actually don't feel that negative about it anymore. Okay. In fact, the intensity almost halves from, say, 7 to about 3.5. And the big reason why that happens is because when you look back on that event, you think that this was maybe the most meaningful thing that happened with me, that I lost the job. That's why I started this company, or I didn't marry that person. And that's why, thank goodness, I didn't marry a maniac, right? And I ended up with this other person, etc. So the idea is that when we look at difficult decisions, hard decisions, we get anxious because we think a lot is riding and negative things can happen. Okay. But if you remind yourself, that, hey, so what? If the negative thing happens, it's probably going to be negative in the moment, but maybe that is the best thing that could have happened to me, and I'll recognize it 2 years down the road, right? So if you have this confidence, in other words, that universe is benign, it's looking out for you, and that, you can do your best to achieve the goals that you want to, but a lot of it is out of your hands. You don't have that control. And in the end, everything is going to be okay, right? If you have this, I call it a spiritual attitude. If you have that attitude, then I think you're going to be much better off. All right. And by the way, for those of you who are aware of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, that's the core message. There's a big reason why that is considered one of the highest philosophies in the world, is that it really helps you out with this very, very big question on how to deal with hard decisions.
What are you referring to in the Bhagavad Gita?
The karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. So basically, the idea is that do your actions, do your duty, but leave the fruits to me. Right? So don't worry too much about the consequences. The way that I interpret that is to say that, look, I'm going to try and achieve these outcomes, but whether they actually unfold or not is not entirely up to me. And I'm going to have a great faith in the Lord, if you believe in God or in the universe, or in circumstances. I'm going to have a great faith in the circumstances that whatever is the best, what was supposed to have happened is what will happen. And because I have this deep faith, I'm going to be reconciled with it. Right. So,
okay. I want to ask a question which one of our attendees, Janvi, has been asking, wanting to find out from you. It's an interesting question, which is related to, people who are epileptic, people who have, mental health issues. Uh, are they kind of prone to, I mean, what can we do to increase their happiness? What is that? And what about the people who are tending to them, because their
Mhm.
life is equally stressful. And so if you have any research, anything that you've learned, you want to share with that, I thought that was a very good question, Janvi.
Great question. Yeah, very good question. When I offered my course for the very first time, the online course, I had a disclaimer at the on the very first page that people had to sign that they are not clinically depressed, etc. And the reason why I had that is because I'll just give you a little brief history of psychology. So for a very long time, ever since Freud is considered the father of the field, right? Since that time at least, until maybe all the way up to 2000 almost, right? Psychology was a field that paid a lot of attention to what might be called negative deviations from normality, right? So people are feeling depressed, people are prone to anxiety and lots of negative things, right? And for good reason, because obviously that is more important to solve than to elevate people who are otherwise normal into even happier states. But the focus was so much on the negative side of things that this Martin Seligman, the president of the American Psychological Association in 1998, when he made the speech to the assembly, he said that he actually did a count of it, the number of articles that were focused more on negative as opposed to positive things, and it was like 80 to 20, like a huge focus on negativity. And he said that that's good that that happened, but maybe it's time to move on and look at what we can learn from people who are flourishing, who are thriving, and so on and so forth. And so this new field called positive psychology was born, and it's become one of the most significant fields in all of psychology now currently. A lot of focus on positivity is because of that. And the reason I say this is because when I introduced my course, I took that message to heart, that this is for people who are otherwise normal, who are wanting to elevate themselves into feeling that their life is thriving and they're flourishing, rather than for people who are feeling depressed to seek a state of neutrality. But despite the disclaimer, lots of people who are actually clinically depressed and suicidal took that course, okay? And I'm really, really gratified. This is one I wouldn't have foreseen, but every month, on average, I get at least one email from somebody around the world saying that this course saved my life, okay? That's when I realized that the very things that elevate us from a state of neutrality to a state of thriving and positivity and flourishing are the things that are also capable of lifting people who are feeling depressed into a state of at least neutrality, if not contentment or above, okay? So, that's one thing that I would say is that, there are some very solid, reliable sort of principles to which we have arrived at in the science about what elevates us. So you can design a life of greater happiness. It doesn't have to be an accident. It is not entirely genetic. And those things are things that we talked about earlier in this session, right? So not to compare yourself to other people as much, to try and seek some level of internal control, to not be mind addicted. And I could add a few other things to that. Relationships are very, very important, right? Trusting the universe. We also talked a little bit about it, that life is benign. It's going to take care of you. So not, taking everything very personally. It's a bunch of things that reliably boost your happiness levels. And if you do these things, then there's just no way that you're not going to be happier, okay? But a problem with a lot of clinically depressed people is that they don't think that these things are going to be effective, right? And we've experienced that clinically depressed. Let's say that you have a breakup or you lose your job. We sit and mope in our homes and we isolate ourselves. We feel ashamed to go out. We don't want the company of other people, etc. And if you ask a friend what you should do, the friend will tell you, just go out, go watch a movie, hang out with friends, come on out, let's have a drink together. But you yourself can't pull yourself up out of that. Okay, that's how clinically depressed feel people all the time, right? So they're not capable of taking that action that everybody else can see is going to help them. So this is where I think that for many of the clinically depressed people, it's very, very important to actually take those drugs. Okay, I know this kind of sounds at some level, bad, especially if you're not clinically depressed, you don't know anybody like that, you might think, oh, no, I want to stay away from drugs. Who knows what it's going to do for me. But really, I mean, would you think that way about putting a Band-Aid on your physical hurt? You wouldn't, right? Even a child of 4 knows that, to do that. Would you say that somebody who's taking Saridon to cure a headache, that's a bad thing? No, sometimes, that is the appropriate thing. You don't want to get addicted to those pills, right? But everything, is a disease, right? At some level, mental diseases are diseases like physical diseases too. So we shouldn't attach a lot of stigma to them. It's easier said than done in a society, especially like India, where there's a lot of stigma to it. We somehow feel that, mental problems are, their own doing, and they just should shake it off. Somehow they're inferior human beings for not doing it, but physical diseases are okay. Okay. Mental diseases too ultimately boil down to physiological things, like your serotonin levels or your dopamine levels. So I would say there are 2-pronged kind of attack of the situation, right? One is to expose these people to psychological things that are going to uplift them, including this course, my course that I talked about, and there are many other courses too. I'm not saying only my course, and it's free, by the way, my course. Okay, so you can take it without having to pay any money. And the second is to seek psychological help. There's no shame associated with it. If you do think that there's shame, then do it privately. Nobody needs to know. But get that psychological help. Get on those pills, because it's going to change the hormonal imbalances. And then after that, they're going to be more receptive to these ideas of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, see, Raj, I don't think even in World War II or World War One, so many people globally were impacted personally by events,
right,
with the way COVID-19. So while I know that millions of lives were lost in both World War One and World War Two, but no one perhaps felt it. We all felt it. In India, we've been in a virtual lockdown. If we are in the bigger cities for 10 weeks, 11 weeks. Okay, same is the case with, So never has the world suffered, in a manner of speaking, together on something like this. It has raised anxiety levels everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the common deterrents you find to happiness in this particular situation?
First of all, I totally agree with you. There's a great documentary on Netflix. I really like it. It's called Explained. They just take about 15, 20 minutes to explain a variety of things, including cricket, which I don't think as Indians we need to watch, but it's for a foreign audience. And one of those episodes is on pandemics. And it's very prophetic, because that series got released in September of 2019. And this pandemic hit us in December, right? And various people are interviewed in it, including Bill Gates and obviously medical people. And they say that, look, and this is why I say it's prophetic, is because they say that, look, if and when a pandemic hits, it's not a question of if, but when, because it's been on the rise. And there's many reasons for it we can get into, including global warming. But when a pandemic hits, people are going to realize that this is going to have a far bigger impact than even wars, okay? Which is exactly what you're saying. So it has to be treated like that, like a war, in terms of the importance it's given, in terms of the amount of money that's poured into it to prevent future outbreaks and so on. But that's not your question. Your question is about, how do we deal with it? Really, so, how do you deal with it is really about, it really breaks down into what particular way in which you're being affected and you're suffering, right? So I've conducted a survey, which more than 3,000 people have filled out now around the world on, are you feeling more depressed and more stressed out, or less, or just as much as it was before the pandemic? And not a big surprise that about 70% of the respondents say that they are feeling more stressed out, more anxious on average because of the pandemic. And a large part of it is due to the uncertainty about the future. Okay, so that's a abstract thing. What does the uncertainty about the future mean? And so for a large majority of people feel uncertain about their job prospects in the future. Again, perhaps not a big surprise, right? So that is the major source of unhappiness, but that is not the only source. There's also people who are feeling very lonely, feeling very isolated from other people. Okay, there are also people, especially women, who are feeling overstretched because they would go work, but then they had help at home, and they didn't have to kind of, constantly be cooking for their kids and, a husband, and everybody else. It's all on them now. They not only have to do their work, but also these things. So women are feeling really stretched. So there's at least these three groups. Okay. And there's, of course, this group that has actually personally suffered a loss, or, like in terms of, having somebody die, or the prospect of it. Okay. So it really depends on which group you belong to. And for each of these groups, there's actually a separate set of things that you can do. So if you're in the first group, of the, the job insecurity, I think that this is a time in which you really have to use the extra time that you have to upskill yourself, take online courses. There's so many of those available. It's not only going to help you in terms of being more relevant to the marketplace later on, right? But it's also going to distract you from the worry of uncertainty. You can fall in love with learning again, as you might have experienced when you were a student, perhaps, right? It's opened up that door of opportunity for you. Also, stay connected with other people, like say on LinkedIn or things like that. I'm not saying that, go around badgering people and telling them that, look, hey, if I lose this job or I have lost this job, now hire me. But, stay connected with people, stay in touch and update them on the various things that you're doing in a kind of subtle way, right? Take action, in other words. It's much better when you take action than if you're just going to sit and ruminate and have dark thoughts. Don't expose yourself to news a lot, right? I mean, this news is mostly negative. Okay, news is mostly negative. In the media business, there's a phrase: if it bleeds, it leads, right? If there's blood, it's going to be the top story. So the more you expose yourself to news, the more you start believing in a doomsday scenario. So don't do that. Instead, I'm not saying completely disconnect, but maybe an hour will be enough. But rest of the time, just focus on things that you would have done. Have discipline. This is very, very important. One of the things that's happened is that because we can sleep anytime we want, wake up anytime we want, get to work anytime we want, we end up not being very disciplined, and that's not very good. So treat it as if things were normal, in the sense that, you got to work from 9 to 5, let's say, or at least from 9 to 1, right? At least carve out 3 hours in a day where you're uninterrupted at work. And that is going to give you a lot of self-confidence, and also kind of structure your day in a way that you're no longer indisciplined. You're frittering the whole day away. So those are the set of things for the people who are feeling job insecurity type of thing. For people who are feeling socially isolated, connect with them on Zoom and things like that. So rather than on WhatsApp, don't spend time that much on asynchronous textual messaging, but kind of, try and simulate as much as possible the face-to-face. This is not going to be as good as face-to-face, but it's better than just text. So get together with family members, talk to your parents, maybe your colleagues that you get along well with, have a happy hour. You bring your own drink, they bring their own drinks, and play games with them, right? So that kind of a thing for the people who are feeling socially isolated. It's got to do with human connectivity. And then for the people who are feeling stretched, there's a bunch of things that you can do there. One of the things that we've done in our family is to, I have kids who are 12 and 15, so they're quite young, and they wouldn't have helped out with the cooking and doing the dishes and all that. But now that everyone's at home all the time, there's just many more of these things, much more cooking, much more cleaning. So we have a big board in my breakfast area where we have, the dates of the week. So 7 different kind of rows, and then everybody's name on the columns. And we just assign tasks for the coming week on who's going to do what, So my kids have to cook 2 meals, only 2 meals a week. Okay. But they're learning, and it's really interesting how they get into a flow state when they do the cooking, even though my daughter's done more, my son not that much, but even he reads up the recipe and then follows the steps. And in the end, when the dish comes out well, you can see him be proud, We also play a lot of board games, and we also have this thing where we pick an activity that everybody in the whole family has to do for that, for that activity. So it's a 2-3 hour activity. It could be watching a movie. It could be like, I'm going to lead a painting class, so my daughter is good at that, or a dance class. My son, is good at tennis, so he's going to tell us a little bit about tennis, things like that. Okay. So we've had lots of creative kind of outlets because of that. That makes us all feel connected, and everybody share, it's not ideal, but, people are sharing more in the chores than would have been the case before. Okay. So let me just end by saying that I actually wrote an article on this topic on how to deal with the COVID-19 stress. It's in Psychology Today, and I can send you the link that you can post maybe to the.
Send it to me, Raj. I'll put it on my website. Most of the folks here would be coming to our website, so maybe.
Sure. And one last thing I'll say on this topic is that, don't be hard on yourself. Don't be hard on yourself now. this is not the time. I really like the statement that the Canadian government put out, so everywhere else it's working from home, we are working from home. They said that, no, this is an unusual time. You're dealing with a pandemic and all the stress associated with it, and you're trying to hang in there. And while you're doing it, you're also trying to get some work done, right? It's a very different framing of the whole thing. It's not working from home. It's when shit is hitting the fan, you're trying to keep it together, and you're also trying to get as much work as you can get done. Okay, that's a much better framing, so that you're self-compassionate. You got to be compassionate to yourself when things are tough. And I think this is a very, very good moment in which to practice that self-compassion.
Okay. Raj, a lot of people want to know the name of your course.
Oh, yeah. It's called A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment. Let me just type it out here. A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment.
And where would you...
Yeah, it's on Coursera. So if you just type out A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment on Google, that link should come up. And then you just go there, register. Now, I did say that it was free, but they're going to constantly ask you for money. Okay, so every once in a while there'll be a pop-up saying that, hey, why don't you? And if you can afford it, why not, right? I mean, the money goes to the Indian School of Business and to Coursera for the most part, and they've put in some money to produce it. So if you think that you can afford it, and the good part about paying is that you're going to take it more seriously. Okay, you're going to do all the assignments and everything more seriously, and so maybe it's a good thing if you can afford it.
Okay. One last question I want you to answer. A lot of us face failures in life. Okay. How do you kind of overcome it in the fastest manner possible over a period of time? But I have seen cases where a failure creates a permanent kind of immobilization in some people's heads that, I'm no good because I didn't get into the army.
Yeah.
Actually, and this is an actual example. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? So the thing is that this is a very important and interesting question, because it kind of gets to this point that I think is very important to remember about happiness, is that when you talk about all the determinants of happiness, right? What is the most important thing? I talked about relationships being important. Ultimately, I think what turns out to be the most important determinant of happiness, okay, is the story you have about yourself and about your life and your place in it. Okay, so the story you tell yourself, the narrative that you have about what life is about and who you are and your place in this universe. And all of those things, all of those determinants, including your relationships, ultimately affect your happiness because it changes the story you have about yourself. The story when you have great relationships is that if I ever run into trouble, I have somebody that can help me out. Okay. And when I have good things to enjoy, I can share it with these people. They'll enjoy it too. And I help them out, and that makes me happy. Okay. That's the story. So if you can change the story about your life, it's going to change your happiness. And this is, in a sense, what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about: changing the story, changing the narrative. And once you understand it, you get to remember that, look, even though these failures happened, okay, doesn't mean that I can't be happy. Okay, even though these failures happened, doesn't mean I can't be happy. And the way to be happy is to change those stories. And for a lot of people, it's very difficult to change that story, because if I didn't get into the army and my identity is stuck to being an army person, right? You feel that you don't want to change the story. It feels almost delusional to say that, so what, I didn't get into the army, not a big deal. Okay, it is a big deal in your own head. Okay, so you have to really kind of recognize at some level that ultimately what matters is whether you're leading a life of happiness and fulfillment. Ultimately, that's what matters. You live what, 80, 100 years. What's the point of going through the whole life feeling regret and pain and negativity? It's not going to change the reality. It's not going to get you into the army now, right? You might as well reconcile to it and remember that what you want to do is lead a happy life, not just because it's good for you, also because you're going to be kinder to other people. So even if you don't look at it from your own, maybe you feel you don't deserve to be happy, fine, okay? But I'd say that you're obligated to be happy for the sake of other people. Because when you're unhappy, you're actually more selfish. you're like, a kind of a needy person, a high maintenance person that everybody else has to now pay attention. Oh, poor you, you didn't get into the army, poor you, this didn't happen to you, how miserable. That's what you're seeking out of other people all the time, that they pour the milk of human kindness into your empty cup all the time. Okay, so think about that. It's gone, it's happened in the past. Now, do you want to be a source of positivity and happiness for other people? Or do you want to be a bit of a beggar who goes around with his begging bowl, asking other people to fill it up because you went through this really bad experience in the past? So there's a really good quote by J.K. Rowling that's relevant to this. She said that there is an expiry date to blame your parents for your life's screw-ups. There's an expiry date to blame your parents. I'm kind of paraphrasing it. Okay. So I think that you can extrapolate that to say that there's an expiry date to blame your past occurrences for your unhappiness now. Okay. Easier said than done. Okay. But once you come to that recognition that what matters is that from now on until the end of my life, can I lead the most positive, most uplifting, most kind and to other people, altruistic, right, life that I can. And let me kind of in slow but steady steps head in that direction. All right. And you can do a bunch of things, including this 3 good things practice that I talked about. Right. The reason it's important is because it changes your narrative. You start to recognize that despite the fact that at a conscious level, you're thinking of all the bad things that are happening to you, all the anxieties, all the negative things, you're starting to actually explicitly, deliberately, consciously recognize all the positive things that are happening. And slowly, it'll take some time, but surely maybe in 6 months, maybe in as little as 6 weeks, you'll start to see a difference that the subconscious is now has a different lens through which it's viewing the world. Whereas earlier it was through a pair of jaundiced glasses that was always looking at things as being negative. You started to not perhaps get rosy, not rose-tinted glasses, but at least neutral glasses, so that you at least acknowledge that when I gave a presentation and 9 people praised it and 1 person said it was bad, earlier you would have focused on that 1 person. Now you're more objective. You're saying, what, let me also recognize that 90% of the people actually liked it, right? So that's what starts to happen. So you can't magically get from a place where you're ruminating about the past and negative things and pain of the past to forgetting about it altogether, right? You got to do it slowly. But the good news is there are steps that reliably will lead you there. It takes diligence. Okay, with all other life's goals, including getting a great career and, earning an Olympic medal or saving enough for retirement, we recognize it's going to take hard work. It's going to take discipline. Happiness, if anything, is going to take even more discipline, even more conscious effort on your part. Okay, it's not going to land into your lap. We somehow think that, I deserve happiness. It just happened. No, it won't happen. You have to train yourself to be a happier person. The good news is that there are reliable steps towards it. The bad news is it's easy to understand these. Okay, and they're simple, but not very easy to implement. Okay, but if you could do it, even within a few months, you'll start to see a big difference.
So wonderful, Raj. I really like your last point, which is you have to train yourself for happiness. The principles look simple, but they require considerable work before you can attain happiness. Those wonderful things. Can I now ask my colleague, Anita, Deputy CEO, to propose a vote of thanks?
Sure thing. Thank you.
Raj, thank you so much for this amazing, engaging session. You've provided us with so many simple ideas and tips to enhance our well-being. I'm sure our audience has enjoyed it thoroughly. You can see it from the comments here. And like Prem said, this is a time where everybody is turning into philosophers. We've had prominent personalities put up so much of content around staying happy. But your clear perspectives, Raj, will help us to put all these principles into practice and experience sustained happiness. And I can say that from experience. In the past few weeks, I've been attending your sessions, and I can certainly vouch for the kind of effect it's had on me. So I'm experiencing improved levels of satisfaction and happiness. So thank you so much for that. And
Yeah.
Great, a lot of fan following, I must say. We've had people registering for this event from Dubai, from Colombia, from Peru, Brazil. So we can truly say that Cafe Mutual today had an international event of sorts. So thank you so much for that. And a lot of people have been asking us for your links for the video. Some people have missed attending today's session. So for them, I'd just like to tell the audience that, Raj's video will be available on our platform, which is www.cafemutual.com in a day or two. So you can watch Raj's video there. And thank you, Raj, once again. This is definitely a perfect start to a happy weekend for us.
Wonderful, Anita and Prem. Thank you very much. It's really an honor and great privilege. It's very heartening to be in a position where you feel that you're helping other people out, and I feel very grateful for the opportunity that I got. Thank you very much.
No, really very happy to have had you with us this evening. Fantastic, Raj. Have a great weekend. Have a great weekend,
Bye.
folks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.